Okay, I received a call from a man in British Columbia. So we have a helpline in Canada because Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, in 2016 they legalized euthanasia. We established a helpline, and we get these calls from people who have been approved for euthanasia based on the fact that, let's say, a family member or someone who they knew said, well, you know, you should call this number. So I received a call from a man in British Columbia, and he was wanting to die by euthanasia. He had multiple health problems. You know, so when you receive a call like this, what do? Well, you know, what you do is you listen. You spend a lot of time listening, more listening than actually speaking. And he had several significant health problems. I had the feeling that he wasn't being properly medically cared for because the multiplicity of his health problems seemed to be a little bit too much. You know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, after like about an hour of, you know, more listening than anything else, but talking with him, the other thing you do when you get a call like this is you try and create a connection with the person. So you ask questions. You're trying to find somewhere where you and that person connect, because if they're not going to talk to you unless they somehow feel they have a trust with you, or, you know, there's something about us that we connect with. But after about the hour had passed, it was about an hour, I said to him, but why do you want someone to kill you? Because that's what you're actually asking for. And he said, well, there's nobody in my life. I have nobody in my life. I have no reason to live. And I think this is an important theme when we're talking about euthanasia and assisted suicide, because of the fact that they're going to sell it to your country as for those few cases of people who are terminally ill and suffering, and they're going to go on about suffering. That's their 3 talking points: suffering, suffering, and suffering. And they're going to make it sound like the only compassionate response to this is to kill. And of course, they're not going to say kill because people don't like that, so they're going to come up with other terminology. So in Canada, they call it MAID, medical aid in dying. So they call it MAID. It's a made in Canada term, MAID. And I always say to them, well, I can't afford a maid. I don't make that kind of money. But it's supposed to be funny, sorry. I know it's Canadian humor, and you're saying, oh gosh, what do you got to put up with this guy? But anyway, the fact of it is they're going to redefine it, but it's really going to be about, you're going to hear these stories about suffering. And we're all human, so we're all affected by people's suffering. And if you weren't affected by people's suffering, that means you wouldn't have empathy, which wouldn't be a very nice type of a human, would it be, if you don't have empathy? So we are all affected by this. This is a primary thing that is the reality. Oh, I got my slideshow clicker right here. So we're told that people ask for euthanasia because of pain or physical suffering. This is what it's sold about. We're told this over and over again. The data actually suggests that very few people who are actually asking to be killed are going through what you call uncontrolled pain in that way. There's very few. There might be quite a few of them who are fear of future pain, but the actual situation is not like that. I'm not saying it's nobody, don't get me wrong. There are people who do go through some very, very terrible situations, no question about it. There are people who are radical autonomists, people who are demanding their right to die. I don't know if you've ever met any of these my body, my choice people. Have you met any of them? No. Okay, there are a few of those, but they're not the majority. They're literally not the majority. Most people ask for euthanasia, why? Because they're going through a difficult health condition, whether that be physical or psychological. They're feeling alone, lonely, they're fearing for their future, they're feeling that their life has lost meaning, purpose, or value. Those are normal human feelings that we all will go through. So I will contend that the problem with euthanasia is it's a killing of a human being, and I'm opposed to killing people, but secondly, it affects all of us. Don't take the line at all that this only affects those few people in these situations, because that's how they're going to sell it. No, it affects all of our lives because we are human, and you'll see that when I go through my presentation, how this affects us. So euthanasia in Canada was legalized in June of 2016. What we did in Canada is we created an exception in our criminal code to homicide. So it's very similar to what the Dutch did. So if you look at our murder, the sections of our criminal code, criminal law dealing with homicide, you'll see that I'm not allowed to kill you, but if 2 doctors or 2 nurse practitioners or one of each decides that yes, your life is not worth living and you had requested it, they can go ahead and kill you. In fact, They have total legal anonymity in Canada. So long as they've signed off, you've got 2 signatures on the form, and they kill you, it doesn't matter how crazy the story was and the situation was, it doesn't matter how off they were, the law gives them total coverage. You can't sue them, you can't prosecute them, you can't do anything. So, and why was the law designed that way? I think it's a very smart reason they did it, as much as it's evil. Because doctors aren't going to go ahead and kill you if they're afraid that it's possible they might get prosecuted. So the law had to give them total coverage, and it did. I don't feel safe in a country where a group of people, doctors and nurse practitioners, have the absolute right and law to kill me. I don't feel safe with that. The law was then expanded in March of 2021. And what they did in March of 2021 is they removed the terminal illness requirement in the law. It wasn't really a terminal illness requirement, but it did create some limits. It said that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable, the original law. Natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. I don't know, does anybody know what that means? Your natural death has to be reasonably foreseeable? I think all of our natural deaths are sort of reasonably foreseeable. It was not defined either. So right off the bat, you knew that the law was designed by our liberal government to be expansive. It was intentionally to be expansive. But when they got rid of that, what was remaining in the law that you have to have an irremediable medical condition. What does it mean to have an irremediable medical condition? Irremediable means you have a chronic condition, a person with a disability. I'm assuming there are people in this room who have an irremediable medical condition, so you're good to be killed in Canada. Just so you know. We also removed the 10-day waiting period, and we also permitted euthanasia for mental illness alone. Now, the mental illness alone question has been a big debate in Canada, because when the law that was in March of 2021 added euthanasia for mental illness alone. At first, they created a 2-year moratorium, because they said, well, we're not ready for that yet. And then in March, so the beginning of 2023, they added another year. They said, well, we're going to wait till March of 2024 because we're not quite ready to kill people with mental illness alone, right? I mean, they have no physical issues, only mental illness. And now they've delayed it to March of 2027. So what's the important thing about that is the government hasn't said no to it. They've just kicked the can down the road, right? Is what they've done, okay? So when they were passing Bill C-7, the expansion, the disability community argued, why us? And I think they were right. Now, why are they right? Well, if you're going to have euthanasia based on a chronic condition, an irremediable medical condition, that means you're actually creating a discrimination, because you have a law that's specifically focused on people with disabilities. Now, of course, you have a terminal condition, you'd also qualify, but I mean, the law allowed people with disabilities to be killed by euthanasia. So I think they were absolutely right when they were saying this. So just so you know, in the Canadian law, they created, so when they got rid of the terminal illness requirement in March of 2021, they created this 2-tier law. So if you have a terminal condition, you can have a same-day death. So you could go in the morning, say, I'm ready for my euthanasia. They'd have to assess you and then sign off. But you could have a same-day death. But if you're deemed to not be terminally ill, so you have a chronic condition, you'd have a 90-day waiting period. So most of the cases I'm going to talk about, that are a little bit crazy, were the 90-day waiting period cases, okay? Because obviously speaking, those people were not terminally ill, and there was other factors. The other thing about the 90-day waiting period is some of these cases, which were particularly horrible, that gave the media a chance to get involved. Someone would talk to the media about it, and so that's how these cases started bubbling up. So Health Canada released the data. Last data we have is from 2022, which is another crazy thing, because we're now October the 5th of 2024, and they have not released the 2023 data. Now, Alex Schadenberg has dug up most of the 2023 data through, access to information and things like that. So anyway, but I predicted that we had about 15,300 euthanasia deaths last year, which would represent about 5% of all deaths. But you can see this massive increase that's gone on. Quebec now has the highest euthanasia rate in the world. What's significant about this is not that, what's significant is how fast this has happened. How fast it is. Remember, 2016 to now is just a little over 8 years, and it's absolutely exploded. You've got a normalization of killing. So we had a story of a 51-year-old woman from Toronto who had MCS, multiple chemical sensitivities. And so, a lot of us have chemical sensitivities. I don't think that's uncommon, but her reaction to things in the environment was quite extreme, so it was a disability for her. Anyway, she was living in social housing based on the fact that with her MCS, she was incapable of working. She would react to things too strongly, right? And she was saying that she was living in social housing. So imagine having MCS, so you get these extreme reactions to things in your environment, and you're living in social housing, a social housing unit, which is a big apartment building where everyone's on low income, and they're quite small units. But what happens then, of course, is you've got some people who are smoking pot and things like that. You get the whole thing going on there, right? And she was saying she could not leave her bedroom. It was so bad. So she applied for euthanasia. She was approved and hit the media. She did not want to die. She wanted a place to live where she did not have reactions like this. But in the end, she died by euthanasia. Now, this story hit the media before she died, and then there was a bunch of people trying to help her, but then she died anyway. She decided that she would take the lethal drugs, the lethal dose. Now remember, let's be very clear about this. This isn't her killing herself. The doctor is killing her, right? This is euthanasia. It's homicide. The doctor is killing her, okay? But 2 weeks after that case hit the media about that she had died, there was a 31-year-old with multiple chemical sensitivities who hit the media because she had also been approved. So now you get like a copycat case. The difference in her case is the MCS community, the multiple chemical sensitivities community, started a GoFundMe page for her, and they raised some money, and she found a clean place to live. The story of Amir Farsu. So Amir, he lives in St. Catharines, Ontario. He has significant back issues, so he's on disability. And he was in a subsidized apartment, and his building was sold to a new owner, and the new owner said that he had to leave because they were going to repair the building. Now here's the thing, he had subsidized housing, so obviously speaking, when you get a disability allowance, how much money you're actually receiving. He couldn't afford, so he found out that he could not afford an apartment anywhere near where he lived. There was nothing. So he applied for euthanasia based on his disability, and he was approved for euthanasia. Now he was on a 90-day waiting period because he wasn't terminally ill, but he said, I made it, like he was in the media and everything because someone heard about his story. Then CTV News, which is a big national news organization in Canada, they interviewed him, and he was quite clear. I don't want to die. I just, with my disability, he says, I would rather be dead than be homeless. Living in the streets was not an option, he said. So what happened is that a group started a GoFundMe campaign for him, and they found him a place to live. But he would have been dead if if the media, first of all, didn't get involved, and a GoFundMe page didn't find him a place to live. 23-year-old. Now, I know this case very well because I was heavily involved in this case. His name was Keanu. Keanu was 23 years old and was insulin-dependent diabetic. He wanted to die. Clearly, he was, depressed. There's no question about it. He had some health problems related to his diabetes. But what's interesting? There was a news program which interviewed him, and they, how with any media they take B-roll. They take some roll of you where you're walking down the street or something. They had all this B-roll of him. See, it's not the actual footage; it's B-roll. Anyway, so they took this footage of him, and he's on his skateboard, and he looks really good. He's doing really well. And then they interviewed him. Anyway, he wants to die, and he was approved for euthanasia at the euthanasia clinic. So his mother actually had contacted me early on. She's really upset with this. She's absolutely beside herself because her 23-year-old insulin-dependent, but he's basically fine, son is approved to be killed. And so what she did is she contacted the Ministry of Health, she contacted politicians, she contacted the media, but then she started a petition and she named the doctor who was going to kill her son. She named him. She knew his name because of, communication with her son. And of course, then that doctor decided not to do it. He thought the heat was too heavy. Now, euthanasia was not the only thing he did, but he was with the euthanasia clinic. So obviously he did a lot of killing. Like people who work for a euthanasia clinic do a lot of killing. The veterans issue. I've been telling your people here in the UK that now that you're going to be debating assisted suicide again, you have to make some inroads with the veterans. Because there's a lot of veterans who serve your country and come back having health issues, having psychological issues for things they've seen, etc. So the very first veterans case was in 2022 in our country, where a veteran who had served in Afghanistan, he came back with PTSD, traumatic stress disorder. So he contacted Veterans Affairs because his PTSD was significant and he was looking for help, and he was told by Veterans Affairs that he should be considering MAID, medical aid in dying, euthanasia. He was very upset by this. This was a guy who was not looking to die. He had no interest in dying. He was looking for help. And they said, well, have you considered euthanasia? Have you considered MAID? So he went to the media, and the story blew up. So you can imagine Justin Trudeau, looking at the news in the morning and seeing a story like this hit the news. It wasn't good on him, okay? It didn't look good on him. So what happened is that the Veterans Affairs Minister, his name at that time, the Veterans Affairs Minister was Lawrence Macaulay. Obviously Trudeau replaced him because of what happened. Went to the media and he said, so he had a big press conference, he said it was one bad case. One situation, it was one rogue employee and one bad case. But of course, if you do that, what happens? Other stories come forward, right? As soon as you have a story hit the media and someone says, oh, well, what happens is the other stories came forward. So we learned that there was at least 10 of them. At least 2 of them had died by euthanasia. And just as the media thing started settling down a bit, Christine Gauthier came forward. Christine served in our military. She became injured in our military. So you see her in a wheelchair. She became then a wheelchair athlete. She won a bunch of awards at the Paralympics, lots of medals. She was, well known at the time as being, a great athlete. She's asking Veterans Affairs for a wheelchair ramp, a wheelchair lift. Now, if you look at the whole thing about Veterans Affairs, she qualifies. She was injured in her line of service. Now she's in a wheelchair. And I saw the one interview with her on television. She's saying, well, I have to go up my stairs. I sit down on the stairs and I have to push myself up one stair at a time to get up my stairs. And she's getting older now. She's not a young woman like she was a few years ago. So, it's getting tough on her. So she wants a wheelchair lift. Now, does that seem unreasonable? And of course, Veterans Affairs said, well, we have no money, Christine, for this wheelchair lift. But if it's that bad, they said, if you're that desperate, we can have you have medical assistance in dying. So she went to the media, and of course that blew up. Here you have a veteran who becomes injured serving her country, who's only looking for a wheelchair lift. And here's the other news. She hasn't received a wheelchair lift yet. She's still seeking funding for a wheelchair lift. Anyway, I contacted her a few months ago. I said, we can help you with that. We can, contact all our people and everything. She says, I don't want that, actually. I qualify for a wheelchair lift. Veterans Affairs should be paying for my wheelchair lift, and I'm going to keep at this. So anyway, someday she might get it. But, that really blew up. You see a picture with her, and you see her in the media with her dog and her wheelchair, and she served your country, okay? She didn't go into the military, a disabled woman. Heather Hancock contacted us. She actually contacted me. It's interesting. I was doing an interview with Roger Foley. You can Google that name, Roger Foley. Roger Foley lives in London, Ontario, and I was doing a Zoom. So that's, again, a platform on the internet where you can have people join you and everything. So I'm doing this interview with Roger Foley, and Roger Foley lives in London, Ontario. He has cerebral ataxia, and his condition's developed to the point where he needs 24-hour care, and he's been pressured at several times to seek euthanasia, right? And he's got no interest in euthanasia. He wants to live. But he's had a lot of pressure on him to die by euthanasia. But Heather Hancock joined our Zoom call. Like we put it out that we're going to have a Zoom event with Roger Foley. She joined, and she leaves a message on the call, in the thing saying she's experienced the same thing. So I contacted Heather and I said, Heather, I'm going to have a meeting with you. Are you available to talk to me on Tuesday at 2 o'clock? And she says, yes, no problem. So I contact her at Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and I'm talking to Heather, and Heather says, well, I've written a few books, and I'm an editor. And so, I'm Googling this. Yeah, she's written a few books. She's actually a great writer. I said, Heather, I don't want to interview you. I want you to write your story. And she wrote a phenomenal story. You can find it on my blog. I can send it to you. But what happened to her? She says here, this is one of the stories. She said, one nurse came to my bedside early in the morning. She's having health problems. She's in the hospital. So this is before breakfast. And the nurse asked her to do the right thing and consider MAID. Think about this. Just think about that. Think about the change in the culture. Think about the audacity of this. And she says, but the next words still ring in my head. If I were you, I would take it in a heartbeat. You're not living, you're existing. Now, Heather would say to you, no, I was going through significant problems at the time. I'm in the hospital, I'm having problems, there's no question about it. And she's had, cerebral palsy, obviously. That's something you get at birth. You're born with that. There's different things that might relate to causing that. But anyway, so, this is the culture shift you're getting. But if you read Heather's story, you'll see that it happened to her twice, 2 different hospitals. So it's not just, it's the normalization of killing and what happens. Recent story out of, I don't know Tracy, and I probably pronounced her name wrong, so I'm not going to pronounce her last name. So Tracy, who has spina bifida, went to the CTV News Montreal because she was angry. So her and her husband, people with disabilities do get married. Anyway, so her and her husband are being interviewed, and she's angry about what? She's being told by medical caregivers when she was also in the hospital having serious problems with pain and symptoms issues and things like that. She's being told that she should be considering MAID, medical aid in dying, euthanasia. So, she's angry about this, and she says, we all agree. She says, pain sucks. We all agree. She says, it's terrible. And in her case, she says, it doesn't stop. She's got this constant pain. So my heart goes out to her, obviously, but she doesn't want to die. She says, I can survive that, but she refers to how she's being treated in the hospital as being treated like a piece of meat. Now I don't know if that's a French expression, I don't know. But the fact of it is that's how she feels like she's being treated. She's being pressured to euthanasia in the hospital. It shows you the normalization. John mentioned about the Second World War. Many people would know about this, but the younger people may not know about this because history seems to hide certain realities about the Nazi euthanasia program that happened. Okay, so there was thousands of people with disabilities who were killed in the Second World War by the Nazis. Okay, and this is actually the program that was before the massive killing centers were set up. So what happened is the perfection of killing, the program that designed their killing methods was first designed at these 6 centers. There were 6 of them that were set up in Germany. Recently I was speaking in Germany, so I took an extra couple days and I rented a car and I went to 3 of them. And it struck home to me because of the massive nature of the killing of people with disabilities that went on. And then you think about, they say this is about freedom, choice, and autonomy. They say this is for free choice for competent mentally capable adults. And you start thinking more about this and you realize, no, it is about a eugenic attitude. It is about killing. An Alberta case, I'm very connected to this case also. We got involved in this case at the court level. 27-year-old woman with autism who was approved for euthanasia in Calgary. She was supposed to die on February the 1st of this year. She's still alive today. Why? Because her dad saved her life. What her dad did is he went to court. And he wasn't arguing that the law was a problem because, you can't really argue that and expect to save the life of your daughter. What he argued was that the decision to approve his daughter for euthanasia was absolutely wrong and done wrong. So he didn't argue that the law was wrong. He argued that his daughter did not qualify under the law and something very wrong had happened. The judge had said in this case, now let's put this in perspective. This is his 27-year-old autistic daughter who lives with them. It's not like she lives in another town. She wants euthanasia. He lives with his daughter, and he argued in the courts, there's nothing wrong with my daughter. She's autistic. She is suicidal. Yes. Well, you see, I have an autistic son. My son Peter's 29. Does Peter get depressed? Does sometimes Peter get a little bit suicidal? Yeah, he does actually. This case really affected me in a huge way. That's why I just sort of jumped all over. I couldn't believe it because it really affected. I have another friend, and I'm not going to give you too much information, but her brother was watching this case closely because her brother's autistic and her brother wants to die. He's quite suicidal. Now, autism doesn't make you suicidal, but you might find yourself with autism so, how would you say, lonely in the world that you might become suicidal. You might. Or you might become very depressed. Anyway, her brother, who is autistic, around the same age, was really watching this case closely because he wants euthanasia. So you see how the copycat problem goes on, right? Anyway, the judge had said in this case that he could not prevent the euthanasia death. There was nothing in the law that allowed him to prevent the death. But he said that the role of Alberta Health Services was what he needed to he wanted investigated, because this young woman had gone to Alberta Health Services to find out how to get approved, and they set it all up. And the judge thought that the whole thing was ridiculous, but as he said, there was nothing in the law to prevent the death. But then the dad, he appealed the decision, and in the appeal process, Alberta Health Services got all nervous, and so the daughter's still alive today. She's actually still looking for euthanasia. It's sad. Also, when I said there, the doctor approved her based on an unknown cause of pain. So during the court case, they brought forward the euthanasia application, and that's what it said. She was approved based on an unknown cause of pain. I have a sore shoulder. I don't know. The similar story in the Netherlands of the autistic woman, many of you may have seen that in the media. The psychiatrist said to Zaria, "There's nothing more we can do for you. It's never going to get better." Think about that. So, when does the role of a doctor who's pro-death or a psychiatrist making such a statement lead to someone's death? She's being told that there's nothing more they could do for her. We have to put this in perspective. When you're talking about psychiatry or anything of this sort of nature, like it's not the same. Not to say that physical health problems are all that easy either. There's big differentiations that go on there too. But when we're talking about psychiatric issues, there is no guarantee of a recovery. There is no, if we just do this, if you have any experience with psychiatry at all, and in Canada we've had a lot of psychiatrists now speaking out against euthanasia because of the euthanasia for mental illness question. And they've been saying, well, there might be 3 or 4 or 5 different types of treatments that are available to somebody, and somebody might not react to that treatment, so we start them on the next treatment, and they say, well, sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it's a whole sort of, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. But they would argue that it's impossible to determine if someone's actually got an irremediable medical condition, meaning there's nothing we can do for you. The argument by good psychiatrists is, we actually don't know because it's not an exact science, Obviously, if you do surgery and you cut a tumor out of me, the tumor's gone. But if I'm going through some mental health issues, it's not the same issue, is it? These are important stories too. The issue around healthcare in Canada. We've got a crisis in our healthcare system. I don't know if you've got the same in Scotland. Is everything in Scotland with your healthcare just, beautiful? Are there waiting list problems? Okay. So actually, I think we're experiencing the same thing, but I think it's a very strong argument against this. Because you've got people dying by euthanasia in Canada. Why? Because they could not receive the healthcare that they needed. So you have the first case that came out about Alison DeCluso. This was an important case because it hit the media not because of euthanasia, even though, so what happened is she was diagnosed as having abdominal cancer, and BC Health said to her, well, in your case, we're not offering treatment because the odds of your recovery are quite low. Okay? That's what they told her. But they did offer her euthanasia, like the whole story mentioned, but she was offered euthanasia, but she was not offered treatment. So her oncologist told her, just go home, prepare your funeral, make sure you say goodbye to all your family members, because we're not providing treatment in your condition. She then contacted several medical centers in the U.S., and she decided to go to Baltimore to the Institute for Cancer Care at Mercy Medical Center in Baltimore. Now, the fact that it says Mercy Medical Center meant it was a Catholic place, just so you know. Obviously, you could tell. It wouldn't say Mercy on it if it didn't. Anyway, she went into remission. You see the picture here. This is a picture that was in the newspaper article, because she said when she went into remission, she decided to marry her boyfriend. So this is a picture from Hawaii on their wedding day. So why was our article in the newspaper? Because she was asking BC Health, she was actually petitioning BC Health, she took them to court, she was demanding that they pay her medical expenses, because they didn't offer her medical treatment, they did offer her euthanasia, so you could say they offered her something. But it's actually sort of weird and funny. I know it's not a funny story, but anyway, that they would offer her that. But anyway, the point of it is that they didn't offer treatment, so she's seeking that they pay for her treatment, because she's now in remission. But when that story came out, it's like everything that happens, other stories soon came out. Like, it was very quick. The story of Mary Griffin, I believe it was like the day after, or maybe 2 days after, hit the same media, where you've got the family of Mary Griffin saying, well, our mother died by euthanasia on March 17th, 2023. So what happened is that she was diagnosed as having cancer. They set an appointment for her to see an oncologist. It took her 10 weeks to actually, that's how long it took for the appointment, right? And when she saw the oncologist said to her, I wish I had seen you earlier, because you've got treatable cancer, but it's now progressed to the point where, treatment doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. So she died by euthanasia on March 17, 2023. And of course, the argument from the family wasn't that they were opposed to euthanasia. This family was actually in favor of euthanasia, but they were upset because their mother wasn't given a choice, right? She was not offered treatment quick enough to get a chance to have treatment. Then there was the case of Dan Quayle, and this is very heartbreaking, because his wife, all the interviews were with his wife, because he passed away on December 5th, 2023 by euthanasia. He died by euthanasia. But he was approved for treatment, so he did see his oncologist, he was approved for treatment, and then he waited in the queue to receive his treatment. And according to the story, that was around 10 weeks also. And by the time they had come to the point to start offering him to provide treatment for him, they had said, oh, Dan, your treatment has progressed. Your cancer's progressed. He was in a lot of pain by this point too. Now, of course, pain you can deal with, but psychological pain related to the fact that you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Anyway, he died by euthanasia. So the widow in this case is very, very upset. She was like, her comment was, we wouldn't have had the money to go to Baltimore for treatment. We didn't have the money to do that. We couldn't have even tried that. It was her argument was. So you see what happens. Stories are important for several reasons. Like, a lot of the things in Canada has happened where there's been a rolling number of stories. So somebody who has a disability, like, coming forward. We had a story hit about the Mississauga Food Bank. So the Mississauga Food Bank, they've got nothing to do with issues around euthanasia. The woman who runs the Mississauga Food Banks in the media, why? She's upset because several of her clients who are coming for food are saying, well, we're asking for euthanasia. We've gone to our doctor. We're seeking euthanasia. We're seeking MAID. And she's shocked by this because, of course, these are people who are asking for it based on poverty, right? Now remember, you don't get approved for euthanasia in my country based on poverty. You must have another condition. But the reason they're asking for it is because of the poverty. The reason they would be approved was because they have a disability of some sort or a chronic condition. The family of Joan Rowaway, well, this is ridiculous. If this weren't in the media, you would say I was really pushing things. But Joan also had cancer. This is another British Columbia case. And Joan was told that there was no further treatment for her. And I'm not questioning that. The family wasn't questioning that. What happened is during the discussion with the oncologist, she was approved. The issue of euthanasia, MAID, came up. The doctor approved her for euthanasia, but Joan said she had never asked for it. So you can see how a discussion could go. Now, the family said, though, that Joan was partially sedated at the time. she was not really of the same nature as she normally would have been, because her cancer has progressed to the point where she was sort of, was she fully competent? They weren't sure. Nonetheless, they said, Joan said that she had never actually asked for euthanasia, but the doctor approved her for euthanasia. So what happens is they get a call from Fraser Health. So Fraser Health is the health integration network just north of Vancouver. I don't know if you get the same thing in Scotland where you get regional health authorities that overlook the medical system, or do you just have one authority? Because obviously we've got Ontario Health, but then they've broken the province down into regions to then facilitate our healthcare, right? So this was the Fraser Health region. They contacted the family saying, we're coming to pick up Joan for her May death. They sent two people, the family said, no, there is no May death. Joan's never asked for May. What happened is that they said, oh, well, you're denying her right to die. We're going to come over and pick her up. So they sent two people over to pick her up, and the family wouldn't let them in the house. So then what happened is they sent someone over who was a little bit more conciliatory and asked Joan, do you want Maid? And she said no. Now, here's the importance of the picture. You notice, Joan is being cared for by her daughter and her son-in-law. So it's not like she's in a hospital where this is happening behind closed doors. She's in her home because she's told there's no more treatment for her. So her family's caring for her. She's not being abandoned. It's not a situation of no one cares for her. She's a loved person. She's approaching death, and they came to get her. Catherine Mentler. Now, Catherine is part of a recent court case that just came, it was just launched last week. The disability lobby, well, it's now would be the week before, I've been in the UK for a week now. Anyway, the point of it is that the four disability groups in Canada have launched a challenge to our euthanasia law in the courts, so we'll see what happens. But Catherine, in June of 2023, was experiencing suicidal ideation. This is not new for Catherine. I've talked to Catherine on several occasions, and she made it very clear that she's had a history of mental health issues. So she knew she was feeling very suicidal, and she was afraid she was going to harm herself. So she went to Vancouver General Hospital to do what? To get help. Okay? And they told her, well, we have no bed for you. Okay. The beds are full. No spot for you. She was hoping that they would admit her, but they wouldn't. And then they said to her, we can't schedule a psychiatric appointment for you until November. So that shows you the backlog and this is in Vancouver area, right? Vancouver. That shows you the backlog. So, oh yeah, we should have euthanasia for mental illness alone, yet you have to wait 5 months to see a psychiatrist. Think about that. Think about that off the bat, especially since they're selling it as choice and autonomy, and there's no choice here. Really, let's think about it. And then the counselor said to her then, oh, have you considered medical aid in dying? So let's just put this in perspective. She's gone to the hospital because she's seeking help. She's experienced mental health issues before. She's of the nature that she knows that she needs this help, so she's gone to the hospital, and they say to her, have you considered medical aid in dying? Now, just the suggestion alone is insane. Think about the culture shift. So Dr. Sonia Gain, this is an important point. He teaches psychiatry at the University of Toronto. He's a past president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. And Dr. Sonia Gain says, and he testified, that it's impossible to predict whether mental illness conditions are irremediable. So what he's saying is, as a clinician, he's saying, and he said very much to our Canadian government, he says, look, I've had patients that looked reasonably well, and I thought for sure with some help and some treatment, they were going to get better, but they didn't get better. They seemed to just continue. And he says, I've had other patients where I thought, holy camoli, they're in really rough shape, and they got better. He says, it's impossible to predict which one will get better, which one will not. He says, all we do is we have a series of treatments we offer, and some of them are very successful, and some of them are not, and we're all different. That's the other thing. Because of, we're human beings, I'm convinced we're all the same, but physiologically we're actually different at the same time. So that's what makes us interesting. We're all the same, meaning we all have emotions. We all have a spiritual nature, a psychological nature, and a physical nature, and we all experience things in a very similar way, even though we might react to it in a variable way, right? Very interesting thing I'm not going to get into. That's the whole thing about euthanasia for people with addictions. The parliamentary committee couldn't be amazed. So here's the funny thing. Once they legalize euthanasia, then it becomes normalized. And the government then, so what happened is when the government first passed this in 2016, they had in the law that there had to be a review of the law starting in June of 2020. Instead, what the government did is they expanded the law, right? That was finished in March of 2021. And then after they expanded the law, then they reviewed the law, but they didn't actually review the law. They reviewed future changes to the law. So the parliamentary committee report came out, but they did say that we should have euthanasia for mature minors. But in that whole hearing around the parliamentary committee, the Quebec College of Physicians, bringing their submission to the government, said, yes, we agree with euthanasia for mature minors, but we also believe in euthanasia of newborns. Now, they do have euthanasia of newborns in the Netherlands. They do have that. But think about this. Remember, it's sold to you, it's sold to the country, it's sold to the people based on this concept of competent adults who are capable of consenting. That's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear about suffering, suffering, suffering. Those are the 3 talking points. I don't know. You got to remember that. 3 talking points. Suffering, suffering, and suffering. Those are the 3 talking points. And they're very effective because nobody here wants to suffer. If you're Catholic, you're told to accept your sufferings. But guess what? That doesn't mean you want to suffer. Okay? I'm brutally honest. We don't want to suffer as humans. But then they're saying it's for competent adults who are freely consenting. And yet now they're talking about newborns. Is a newborn capable of consenting? Is this not just plain eugenics? Life unworthy of life? Is this not very similar to the German euthanasia model? Then also the committee said that we should have euthanasia by advance directive. Now think about that. I'm 56, so let's say I put in an advance directive that if I'm unable to recognize my wife, I would want euthanasia. You know, this is just a funny joke, meaning I'm not competent anymore, and I'm not capable of consenting, etc. They'd have to go ahead and kill me. Because if the law were to allow that, they would have to go ahead and kill me, right? And then is this about consent? Is this about free consent? Is this about competence? Is this about... No, it's about someone deciding you fit that criteria now, you asked for it, we'll have to now kill you. This is what they're talking about. Euthanasia is sold to the culture as enabling personal autonomy and choice. It's not about personal autonomy ever. Euthanasia is when a doctor kills you. So if you bring in assisted suicide, it's a little different, but still the same. So the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide is euthanasia is the doctor or the nurse does the act. They kill you. It can be done by injection, or often they do it by hooking up, you know, the IV line. But it's them doing it to you, homicide. Can it be autonomy when someone else is killing you? Think about that. They're selling it as autonomy. Is that autonomy when someone else is killing you? Now, with assisted suicide, it's the same, or very similar drugs, very similar poison. Call it poison. There's nothing medical about this, okay? This is poisoning you to death. The intention's the same. The intention is to cause your death. The only difference is how it's done. With assisted suicide, technically you have to do it to yourself. But remember, the doctor is directly involved in the act because the doctor is signing off and prescribing you this lethal concoction and saying your life is not worth living. I agree with you. Go ahead, take a lethal concoction. They're directly involved in the act. It's not about autonomy. It's a lie. They say it's all about people who are suffering and nearing death. Is that what it's all about? People who are suffering and nearing death? And how do you define suffering? Like if you look at the Canadian law or you look at the Dutch situation, they refer to suffering as something I can't, you know, it's a situation I can't, I'm not willing to accept the nature of the suffering is basically how it's worded. But that's very about me. That means if I claim I'm suffering, I would qualify. But you can't prove I'm suffering. I'm not saying they're not suffering, I just don't know. I'm not inside of them. I don't know what they're experiencing. So it's all subjective. It's all completely subjective. We're told that it's not a form of suicide because these people are rationally choosing. Are they rationally choosing? Are people rationally choosing? Is that the truth? Sometimes, usually not. All of these points are philosophically wrong or simply not the case. So this is the lie. I call it the big lie. Euthanasia and abortion together, they're about a big lie. You know how the big lie works. If you say something enough, people come to believe it's true. And that's what they've done with euthanasia. It's the big lie. Most people die by euthanasia. Why? Is it because of this extreme suffering? No. I'm not saying nobody is experiencing a situation where they're not suffering. But you know, we can deal with the suffering. We can deal with the suffering if we choose to deal with the suffering. But it's usually about someone going through a very difficult health condition, physical or psychological. They're feeling their life has lost meaning, purpose, or value. They're often quite depressed or emotionally upset by their situation. They're feeling there's no more purpose to living. We all go through those feelings in different ways in our life. You know, you don't have to be, you know, a great psychiatrist or psychologist to realize there's a real problem here, because we're all human. Euthanasia threatens your life. Assisted suicide threatens your life because you are human. It's got nothing to do with vulnerability. They talk about vulnerability, and you're going to get into this argument. People are going to say, oh, we can't allow this because of vulnerable people. Well, you can't allow this because it's killing people, right? It's about killing. Don't be afraid to use the term killing. They're going to hate you for it, but that's okay. People say to me all the time, Alex, it's not about killing, it's made. Okay, so what's made? Oh, it's when we kill someone. Yes, that's right. It's when we kill someone. That's exactly it. Let's just be really honest. It's about killing. And the other thing is you have to use the term. Why? Well, maybe they're going to make you sound like you're a bit crazy for using the term, but the fact of it is it upsets them because it's true. It is about killing. But the other thing is, this is about abandonment. They say this is about autonomy. It's not. It's about abandonment. We're abandoning people in their time of need. That's what we're actually doing here. These are deaths of despair. Historically speaking, when someone was going through these conditions, the doctor would work on finding a way to help that person through their difficult time. Euthanasia Prevention Coalition was co-founded by a woman named Jean Eklund. She was one of our co-founders, and she was a palliative care nurse. She won a lot of awards in Canada. She won some amazing awards in Canada because of her compassionate care for people. And these were national and provincial awards she won. She was recognized as one of the great palliative care pioneers in our country. And she exuded compassion. And Jean would always talk about a lot of people go through these feelings that their life lacks meaning, purpose, value as they're approaching death. And she says the role of a caring person is to help them find little meanings, little purposes, and talk in that way to help them through their situation so they can die a natural death as a full human being in dignity. So like the Netherlands and Belgium, Canada is debating euthanasia for children, euthanasia for people for incompetent people. We're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia. We're talking about, by advanced request, euthanasia for mental illness. All these topics are being heavily debated in our country. Why? Because there was only one line in the sand. That is, I can't kill you. Once you cross that line in the sand, there isn't another line in the sand. There is only one. You know, the other side says, oh, well, it's only going to be for those few cases. That's what they're going to argue. Or the law, they're going to say to you, it's not going to be like Canada. That's what they're going to say to you. Oh, we won't be the same as Canada. They're going to tell you that. But in Canada, we argued about what was going on in the Netherlands and Belgium. What did they say to us? We're not going to be the same as the Netherlands and Belgium. That's what they said. Oh, it won't be the same here in Canada. They said it was only going to be for the few cases. I remember in the media that story coming out where the Quebec Minister of Health, remember Quebec's our French province, everything's different in Quebec, that's the truth. The Quebec Minister of Health said it's only going to be for about 100 cases a year, that's it. Now 100 you'd think, oh, that's a pretty big number. No, but it's been thousands. It's been thousands, and Quebec's got like the highest euthanasia rate in the world. Because they wanted to sell you on those very few cases, and we all want to avoid suffering, so it seemed reasonable. It's not reasonable once you open the door, because you can't control it. It's impossible. The other thing is the issue of discrimination and equality. So once it's legal, then the argument kept on coming at us. Well, it's discrimination not to allow it for someone who's not terminally ill. But it is, isn't it? If I can kill someone who's terminally ill, well, what about the person who's chronically ill but has similar conditions? Well, that seems, now that's heartless, that we won't allow it for that other person, but we do allow it for this person. You can't control it because there isn't another line in the sand. And then the other thing is you legalize, the goalpost changes. So previous to legalization, they argue about the safeguards, because what are they trying to do? They're trying to sell euthanasia to the politicians who might be more questioning it. So, well, we got to get the votes in. We got to get enough votes. So they'll say, oh, well, we'll make sure there's a terminal illness restriction because that'll help out those other 50 here. They'll vote with us. Those 50 will vote with us because we'll make sure it's got a terminal illness restriction. We're going to say it's only for these cases. We're going to make sure there's got nothing to do with mental illness, nothing to do with children, and da-da-da-da. We'll make sure this. We're not going to be like Canada. And then, of course, you cobble together enough votes, you pass it. Guess what? It's harder to pass a euthanasia bill than it is to expand it once it's legal. And you see that actually, the Canadian situation is one situation, but if you look at the US, and I've done a lot of articles about the US has got 10 US states that have assisted suicide, 10 states. Almost every state that has legalized assisted suicide has expanded their legislation. So they first have to come up with a compromise bill to pass it, and once it's passed, then all you're talking about is making some expansions. The killing's already approved. That's done. Now you expand it. So you have to remember, this is a long-term project for them. The goal right now of Keir Starmer's people will be to cobble together a bill that gets them enough votes to pass. That's what they're doing. And they're going to be talking to members of parliament, especially there's lots of new Labour members of parliament. They won't know where they stand, and they're going to figure that one out. And this is what you're going to face. But once it's acceptable, then the only question that remains is, well, who will do the killing and what reasons? Because killing's already okay. Right? Killing's already okay. So that's where we're at. That's what's going on, and that's how you can't allow this to become legal. You've got to do everything you can. Use Canada's stories. They're easy to find. I produce lots of articles. Now, there's a pamphlet at the back that the Duty of Care and Care Not Killing people, Care Not Killing, have produced, and it has a bunch of these stories in it and information in it. They have a pamphlet. I've got some materials at the back. I've got the one that I've only got a few left of, which is Canada's Maid Laws Gone Mad. It's just a pamphlet with there's only a few left back there. So anyway, use our stories. The sad thing that's happened in Canada is horrific to Canadians, but maybe it helps you stop this. And if they say, oh, well, we won't be like Canada, guess what? They said the same thing in Canada. You know, I was speaking last, what was it, when Ilona Finley brought me, I was speaking to these House of Lords members, and there was someone who came to that event that I was speaking at, who was from the other side, and she was just, you know, pleasantly listening to my talk, and afterwards she goes, well, you know, we're not the same as you guys, and she gave all her talking points, right? And I just looked at her and I said, that's exactly what they said in Canada. It's exactly the same thing they said in Canada. So, you know, it's not true. The same effect will happen here. Whether it goes as fast as it did in Canada or goes a little bit slower, in the end you'll get to the same place. It's all about killing, and it's okay. Now, I don't know if I have any time for questions. That clock says 12:30, but I know that clock's off by a few minutes. I spoke for a long time, and I speak with a funny accent, but at least I had notes up here for you to look at. Now you notice I didn't talk about hockey, so you know I kept to my topic. You know, yeah.